Hey everyone, today Frost Giant said, yeah, you know what? Maybe some things are broken from 0.3. Maybe we should update the balance. So we got a balance patch at 0.3.2 because we already had some stuff earlier on, and it hopes to address some of the issues that may exist within A, the bug land, and B, the state of competitive play for Stormgate. So we're going to take a look at it. It's going to be good. But at the start, there were some issues with automated control groups where units were not A, getting applied properly, or B, when they would transform in some way. So like a vector would shoot forward, you would go and you would teleport with the vector, you would lose some of the commands. You would lose the ability to teleport others or teleport backwards. So this has all been fixed. The following units should now be able to assign hotkeys and automated control groups. The recallable vector, which would just leave your control group, that should be fine. So that's all fixed. Fixed an issue where certain abilities would not work if you were shift queuing them and using by command style hotkeys. Great. Shift queue works a little bit better. Now fix an issue where morph units that have been manually removed from a control group would be oh, thank you. This means that, you know, when you go, I think hopefully this means that if I split brutes, my fiends will go on the hotkey my brutes were in, not back into my main army hotkey. That's the thought. That's the dream. Hopefully that also impacts the drop when you have a drop going and you pick up and drop things from that drop. Hopefully that fixed that too. Oh, never mind. Fixed an issue where dropping units from a transport would add them to the control group if you had an automated control group setup. It's fixed. Awesome. Love that. Gameplay. Fixed an issue where users would occasionally kicked out of a game for no error message. That is a massive change. That has caused actually some issues in every tournament I've cast, I think, between when 0.3 came out and now. You would have just two people would be booted from the game. Error message would like briefly pop up or no error message, and it was just really rough. It's like, okay, we actually had that happen in the finals of the Chalk tournament, and it's like, well, you know, Snockstar was in the lead, but he hasn't won, so we got to give Mixu a regame, but that kind of sucks for Snockstar. So yeah, very happy they fixed that one. Fixed an issue where some regions were incorrectly seeing tombstones, green blood, and removal of bones. Oh, so this is the Korea issue, where they added, I want to say they added tombstones because it was getting around a high rating, so like the equivalent of like rated M, and they didn't want to be rated M in Korea, so they added that, but it was a little buggy, so I think hopefully they fixed that. We'll see. But they've also gone and given us a balance patch, which I think 0.3 gave us a very good first idea about how the balance was going to go, but obviously it can improve. There were some issues. Purify maybe a little bit too strong, maybe Nanoswarm a little bit too strong. Infernals don't do any damage. There's that one. Although I say that, but even still, Chalk tournament was run by Snockstar. The Ariel tournament was won by, I want to say Snockstar as well. Two of the three tournaments in the last 2 weeks were won by Infernals. So, you know, although granted, is that because Snockstar is just really good at the game? Is it because Infernals are overpowered? You know, see what me as well. Although it did seem like Vanguard was a little struggling against Magmadon. So let's see what they have given us. First thing is that general, like across everyone, the worker units, so Bobs, Imps, and Prisms are no longer light units, which means that effectively, okay, we're going to read what they said first. With our changes to worker health across the board, sometimes the ability to kill workers got too volatile. In the past, we balanced our anti-light units around the fact that they could annihilate workers, which felt too restrictive. So this just means it opens up a little bit of room. Also means that, say, Gaunt Drops, for example, are not going to shred workers as well. Kree run-bys are not going to shred workers nearly as much, which I think is fair. I like how worker harass has become more viable in the most recent patch, but, you know, 2 Korean Illuminate line blowing things up, for example, or like Gaunt's annihilating worker lines, and maybe a little too volatile there. So remains to be seen. I don't hate it. They've also buffed Bob HP a little bit. I know there was a lot of feedback from Vanguard players saying it's like, well, okay, Fiends run in, and even if I respond, Bob's, they die too fast anyway, so it doesn't really work out. In general, we feel that the modifying the health of workers tends to get us into situations where harassment is either too volatile or too difficult. In the future, we're looking for alternate levers to allow us to unmodulate this dynamic. I wonder what those levers might be, because, okay, so changing HP, if that's kind of out the window, you can go, maybe there are units that have bonus damage versus workers, but that feels too cookie cutter. Maybe you do it in map design where you make maps more harassable, man. You can also like tune down top bar abilities and static defense. That's probably the way they're going to go, I guess. But the thing that I think is really interesting is the Lancer here. In the last 2 patches, Lancers have gone from 260 HP to 210. That's almost a 25% cut in Lancer HP. They got a little bit more damage versus everything. They do the same amount of damage versus light and versus actually less versus structures or versus light structures. But same amount of damage versus structures, same amount of damage versus light units. But it's kind of interesting because Lancers, for as long as Stormgate has existed, their job is just to be there and not die and tank for the Exos. They're moving more and more into, they're going to die more, but they're going to do more damage. And in general, we saw Monk in the AMA like in December saying, hey, we're going to be messing around with lowering time to kill a little bit. And this is what's been happening. We saw that with Worker Line. Lancers are getting nerfed a little bit as well. So we'll see how this works out. It may be, Magmadons were already a really strong counter to them. That may be more problematic. We'll see. I don't feel like Lancers were too tanky in the last patch. I kind of look at this, I'm like, maybe. I don't know. But we did get a +1 buff to Exos. There is that. When you mass Exos, you know, +1 damage per Exo. If you got 10 Exos, +10 damage, +20 damage, whatever, which does actually add up quite a bit when we were trying to go and kill Magmadons, which has kind of been this issue because Magmadons, especially tier 3 Magmadons, seem to just be something that maybe we don't have an answer just yet. Refresh and Snox are played an incredible game on Isle of Dread that showed us, you can make it happen, but it just feels like the answer is run while the stomp is going, and that's not the most interesting micro. So they're given a little bit more power there. They're still going to have less range. They're still pretty heavily nerfed because Gaunts and Miasma are just much better against them. So it remains to be seen. Nanoswarm has been reduced back to the same damage it used to. There's been reset back to 200 HP. And I think that was kind of the goal of when the buff happened. It's like, no one's using this, guys. Let's go and fix it. So they've gone back, like, we're going to roll it back now. It's a little bit too strong because I believe now a Prism's 180 HP. And if you surge the collection array, I believe the array is going to heal the Prism. I believe the array is going to keep the Prism alive if a Nanoswarm is dropped on it. So that's really good. It's still going to one-tap Kree. It's still going to, I want to say it's going to one-tap Argents. Pretty sure on that one. So it's still very strong, but it's not just going to be an instant kill for everything, almost everything that a Celestial has, which is probably a good spot to be in. Maybe it should be like 250 and can't target structures. I don't know. But yeah, no, I think this is probably a good change. The offensive Nanoswarm was just like, I'm going to run MedTech's in. Your base is dead. Like, good luck. Your economy's shattered. Not great. So they've also gone and made it so Sky Mites actually cost something, which is nice. You were just seeing Vanguard players drop them on cooldown. It was a bug. They were supposed to be worth something. But also 25 Luminite was maybe a little too expensive. I would have been fine with putting back 25 Luminite in, and then if it is actually too expensive, rolling it back. But they got some feedback saying, maybe it's too expensive. So 10 Luminite instead of 25. It's still something. It's not just this free spam around the map and have fun. Also a little bit less powerful versus ground, which I like. There were some Hornet builds where it's like, oh, great, you've killed off all the Gaunts. Good luck, you know. So anything to reduce their air versus air to ground, I think is good. Moving on to Infernals, Fiends. I like the buff, but I can understand why it was a little too strong against structures and undefended worker lines. So yeah, our most recent buff to Fiends allowed them to be slightly too destructive. Fair. So they're rolled back to where they were in 0.2.1. Hexen, fix an issue where Venom traps damage structures. Was not aware of that bug. Miasma range decreased. Miasma now does more damage. Still, let's see, 20, what is calculator? 480 times, what was it, 0.7, 0.4? Yeah, no, or 0.04, there's like 19 damage. That means, I forget what old Miasma did, but it does make it a little bit more useful against everything. It makes Miasma, you have to commit to it more because you got to get much closer within range, but it's going to start to pop things. At least light units, at least units that are not Vulcans. And which is fine because turns out Magmadons are actually a really good Vulcan answer, so that's fine. That's okay. Miasma having a stronger threat and generally more counterplay. Great. Magmadons have been burfed. They cost more Luminite. They cost less Therium. And we're going to see this happen with the Hellborn as well, which is good. I think if you're not going to change the maps up, which does not appear to be happening, if you're not going to change the maps up and make sure that there is 3 Therium mines, 3 Therium patches per base, go and fix everything, but go make them cheaper, because right now you just get so therium starved in the late game as Infernals that it's a problem. So fixing that's great. Love that. Also, Hellborn are they're potentially useful units again. They got a flat buff to all structures or all units by 3 or by 5, and then significant buff versus heavy. So filling that same role like a Saber or an Atlas will, because Hellborn were not good anti-unit units up until the point where Molten Touch came out. So I think this is fantastic. It still does the same. Actually, it's been nerfed versus structures a little bit, 90 versus 100. But I think this is great. I think the Hellborn doesn't really have an identity right now, but that isn't in a large part because we're just lacking units. And if you don't have an identity and you're lacking units, sure, the Hellborn is going to have to go be some band-aids. And in this case, I think giving a little bit more damage versus heavy, this range damage, I think that is good. I think that gives a lot of power. And realistically, a lot of the units you're sieging with a Hellborn are heavy structures anyways, so you're doing a 90. And then, of course, it also makes it's a bit of a Celestial buff as well, because you would use Hellborn. One of the reasons you would use them would be to take down like power banks and link nodes and the structures that a Celestial player would push with. So losing a little bit of damage off the top of that makes it a little easier for Celestials to survive in their outposts and make their pushes a little bit more. So debuff really for Infernal certainly, but also not bad for Celestials, all things considered. In addition, we receive feedback that you need a single target anti-heavy weapon. Celestials. Collection arrays have been nerfed. Build time has been nerfed. Nerfed both off regular and off the Morph Core. Prisms also nerfed a little bit. And realistically, the Celestial economy was scaling a little bit too fast into the early game. Not as bad as it was in 0.2, but or 0.21 when we had the eco change, but still a little too fast. So they've rolled this. I think actually 0.21 was fine. So they've pretty much rolled back to those numbers. This should be okay. If it's a problem, we'll tune it. But I think this was a needed change. Celestial economy scaled just a little bit too fast. Now, top bar Purify was probably too strong. Removing energy, giving energy, removing debuffs and buffs versus friendly units and enemy units, respectively. And that was probably too conceptually strong. But nerfing it by 10 energy and 60 seconds on a recharge this may be too much of a nerf, honestly. Yes, they have gone and they've nerfed the Nanoswarm to compensate, but that is a massive nerf. I think you do one or the other. I don't know that this was, I would have liked to just maybe remove one charge or remove some of the offensive potential of Purify, but this feels like too much of a nerf. That or it was that OP and it needs to be, half again as long of a cooldown. Half again as much power cost. I mean, that is a massive nerf. Also, this is Argent Rush targeted. Salvation heal per second decreased by 5, but increased by 10 seconds. So it'll heal the same, but you can cancel it earlier. So yeah, they're saying Skyward Salvation was slightly too powerful in certain rush strategies. So we're tuning it down without impacting auto combat. So that means you'll be able to cancel it and the healing won't be as strong, which is good. Argent damage decreased from 10+3 to 9+2. High energy cost decreased by half. Damage changed from 15 plus 4.5 to 13.5 plus 3. So you get high energy more often, which is call it 17 damage, right? Overall, probably a damage buff, but when you run out of power, it's worse. Is that a damage? I think it's somewhere between the two. I think the expected value, we'd have to see how this is going to work out. I think this is aimed at like making those all-ins not as strong, like that initial hit being not as strong. The three conclave, the 3-chamber Argent timing. But this might be a DPS buff because you get twice as many empowered shots. You get 6 empowered shots instead of 3 if you start with full power. All right, so math for a second here. Let's say against a brute, let's say just a regular unit, 13.5 times 6 is 81 damage. 15 times 3 plus 10 times 3. I think this might be, I think there's an overall marginal buff actually, but I think this is an overall buff. It doesn't burst as hard, which means that maybe the 3 chamber is gonna be a little bit less strong, maybe. But yeah, it's overall damage buff over time. Kree has lost a lot of damage. specifically against light units. So Blazing Fury or Radiant Fury still does 40 damage to light units, but only plus 20 to everything else, which means it's not going to blow up Lancers. It's not going to blow up Roots. It's not going to blow up your your Gaunts and not your Workers either, because they're no longer light units. So a little bit more focused, which is nice. Vectors. Ground range increased by 1, but damage nerfed except versus light units, which gets a buff. Now that Workers no longer have the light tag, giving Vectors more of a combat role. So there's actually a significant buff to Vectors, and I think we'll see them a lot in play going forward. +1 range, significant. Also, they're no longer bugged, so they're not going to be hotkey issues, which is a big reason why people weren't using them in the first place. So no hotkey issues, and they're buffed means big buff, massive buff. And a match affecting issue where Dark Prophecy would sometimes not deal the intended amount of damage, and it no longer ramps up. So it does 27.5 damage per tick over 4 seconds, or per second, excuse me, not per tick, plus the 50 burst at the end. So it means it's going to start hurting from the very beginning, and it's going to actually do what it's supposed to. So we weren't seeing Dark Prophecy last patch because of the bug. That would pretty consistently mean it wouldn't do damage. Behind the scenes, this was one of the most complicated abilities in the game without enough coolness to justify the complexity. We'll be reducing the complexity to enable it to deal more consistent damage. Fair. Also, again, we should see Animancers a lot more now because they actually do the damage they're supposed to. Archangels, a little bit smaller. We think they could afford to shrink down a little bit given their current art. Felt a little clumsy. Okay, it's the Ultralisk effect. By the way, revert the Ultra revert the Ultra in beginning. Thank you. That's all I ask. But yeah. There we go. So it seems like overall, Infernals get a bit better of an answer to heavy units. Also, Miasma's stronger, but you have to get closer. Wasn't quite the siege change. Vanguard, honestly, kind of nerfed a little bit across the board. Let me go back and look at the Vanguard stuff. Yeah, Vanguard kind of nerfed across the board, except for Exos. We'll see. I think they were already... this might be a little bit of a rough patch for them. We'll see. And then Celestials, they get a kind of a mixed bag. They go... Oh, in fairness, Infernals were nerfed a little bit too. Fiend damage nerfed quite a bit. And then Celestial's economy brought in line a little bit, but given some more toys to play with, specifically Animancers and maybe the Archangels. Maybe that'll help them be a little bit more combat ready. But yeah, I'm excited. We'll be running some Stormgate Sundays on Sunday. It's going to be a best of 9 of best of 1s of Snogstar versus Refreshed and some other stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm excited to figure out how this balance patch is going to change things. But those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know. And if you want to stay up to date with how Stormgate is developing and developer interviews, casts, all that stuff, make sure to go sub to the YouTube channel. Follow me on Twitch, and I'll catch you next time.